We were talking there about the prospect of this people's vote or second referendum, however you want to call it. Is that something you want to see?
Well, look, I want the conference to be able to debate it. And, you know, one of the things that Jeremy and I said when we were elected 3 years ago was we want to give the party back to its members. And I've been very pleasantly surprised by the number of constituencies that have submitted resolutions this year. There's over 100 on this area. They're in a room now discussing what we call compositing, and I want the conference to have a good debate on it.
Are you worried that there might be a bit of a fudge? That it won't be a clear-cut vote put to the conference floor?
There's always a danger when you have sort of resolution-based democracy, but you know, Brexit is such a binary issue that I think the debate will be, you know, there'll be all sides of the argument aired. And when it comes to a second referendum, I'm sure there'll be words on offer that will allow the party to come to a fixed view on that.
Do you think some people listening to this will think this is the beginning of the great betrayal? You're listening to Labour members who, yes, overwhelmingly support the idea of a second referendum, but what about Labour voters in places like your constituency in West Bromwich who voted to leave the EU and now see this as effectively politicians stitching it up so they don't get to have their say?
I understand why our Conservative opponents might say that, but for us, you know...
about Labour voters here as well.
Yeah, but our opponents characterise the debate as that. What I hope we can do is win an argument and say, look, we're a democratic party now. We've got 500,000 members.
It's not just the Conservatives saying it, though, is it? It's voters that I've spoken to as well, Labour voters.
Well, hear me out, because I talk to my electors regularly in West Bromwich, and what I'd say to them is, well, as a national political party like the country, we have all flavours of Brexit on offer. But the point is, it's not just down to me and Jeremy Corbyn anymore to decide what our party is. We've genuinely democratised, and it's down to our members to decide. And I hope that I could say to my voters, whatever our Congress decides, that it's a democratic decision. And if they vote for a position that means we have to go for a people's vote, then the argument would be we want more democracy. Now, let me say though, and I feel I do need to say this, that is not the view that Jeremy and I take. What we have said and still want the conference to support is that there is a meaningful vote in Parliament on the Brexit deal, and if we can't get a meaningful vote, then there should be a general election which would give all my voters in West Bromwich and the rest of the country their say at a general election too. Very hard to argue against more democracy, I think.
So if you want to have a general election, we're going to be having this vote very shortly on Brexit. Should it be in the Labour Party manifesto then that Labour would offer a people's vote or a second referendum if that's what conference says?
Well, we decide our manifesto in the first few days of a general election, and there are a lot of things you need to factor in: the prevailing economic climate, the whole other packages in there. It seems to me inconceivable that if the Labour Party democratically decides, the Labour Party Congress decides it wants a manifesto pledge on a people's vote, that we would defy that decision. But I'm already in the boundaries of talking hypotheticals with you. I think we need to have the debate at the conference and see what our delegates decide to do.
Yeah, we need to, I understand that you want to listen to the debate, but at the same time it's fair enough to push you on these things, because at the minute we are running out of time, aren't we, on Brexit? It's time for people to come forward and openly say what they think. So what's your view then? If there was to be a second referendum, should the option of staying in the EU be part of it?
Well, we certainly have to consider it, and if the conference sends us that message, I think we consider it very strongly. But for me, it's important we can unite around a manifesto commitment as a whole party. You know, we are seeing
it, hasn't it? Surely, if you're going to have a second referendum,
it's likely, but I'm putting an insurance policy in there because you know it's not me that decides the manifesto. We've got a thing called the Clause 5 meeting, and we would have to discuss the political landscape when that hits us. And let's not forget, this could be any day now. After Salzburg on Thursday, there's newspaper reports that leading politicians in the Conservative Party are sort of mapping out what a November general election would look like. This country, this government is on the verge of collapse. We could have another general election basically around Brexit. That's why this conference it's vital that we unify and that we have a solid programme we can offer the country at the end of it.
So the key question, as we're talking about the possibility of a second referendum, how would you vote in it?
On a second referendum, if there was a second
If there was a second referendum, would you vote to stay in the EU? Would you vote for no deal, or would you vote for Theresa May to stay?
I voted Remain in the last referendum. I think it is highly likely that I'd probably vote Remain in the next one. But I would look at what the question is on offer, and I'd want to know what the deal is that comes out of the negotiations in Europe if that happens.
Okay. Now, I'm keen to talk about other issues around the Labour Party conference. There's been a lot of talk, hasn't there, about mandatory reselections. There was a vote at the National Executive Committee that effectively makes it easier for party members to reselect their local MPs. Is this something that worries you?
It does make me feel uncomfortable. In fact, believe it or not, what came out of the National Executive Committee is a compromise. My view was that the status quo prevailed. I was with John McDonnell on that one, but like I say, we're a Democratic Party and we've got a different view. There is a rule change on the order paper that would have full mandatory reselection, and I think that would be very destabilising for the party because we're potentially close to a general election, maybe any day. What we don't want is MPs trying to defend their positions in their local areas when they could be campaigning in Parliament for social policy that affects the many, not the few. So I'm worried about it.
Are you worried that there might be a bit of a toxic atmosphere in the Labour Party? I mean, there's been reports today about a Labour MP who is going to be needing armed security as they go around their daily business. I mean, this is really worrying stuff, isn't it?
It's extremely worrying, and please don't forget that we've also had a colleague assassinated in the last few years. So those security threats to my colleagues, particularly my female colleagues, is very real and very serious. Much of that has very little to do with the activities of local Labour parties or Labour Party members. It's external bodies, Islamist and far-right bodies. But nevertheless, I am concerned that we had some of our younger, newer MPs who sort of faced votes of no confidence. And look, parties have got the right to express their disappointment in their MPs if they want to, and I always think my own members have earned the right to shout at me when they think I'm doing things wrong, and they frequently have done over the last 17 years. But if it goes too far and people feel alienated or the morale goes or they're driven out, it stops us aiming for the main prize, which is a Labour government for the many, not the few, with a transformed political economy that can really give greater opportunity to millions of people that have lost out in globalisation, through tech change, and over the last 20 years, the pie is not being cut enough for them. So, let's focus on what unites us. Let's try and get a manifesto we can be proud of again, and let's get to a general election as a united party. Calling for the party to unite.
But the slightly brutal truth is, are the membership really going to listen to you? Because the problem is, many of the membership, some of the membership, see you're part of the problem, you're the enemy, you're not supportive enough of Jeremy Corbyn.
Well, there's always a small number of members for whom you can never satisfy. And with 550,000 members, everyone's got a view. But actually, my experience of going out and campaigning for the party in all parts of the country is when we recruited lots of young new members, at first it was a bit of a culture clash as more experienced members were sort of quite challenged by that. But they've worked it out and they're all getting on, and lots of the
you and I both know that there is a split, isn't there? There's divisions between the leadership and the membership on one side and the Parliamentary Labour Party on the other.
Well, in the Parliamentary Labour Party, we have had some bad behaviour from some of my colleagues, but actually my take on the Parliamentary Labour Party since the general election is they're united too. They want Jeremy as Prime Minister, they want the party marching in the same direction, and they want us to get to a general election with a programme we can all unite around and be proud of. We're a broad church. We know that to win elections, every voice in the Labour Party has got to get its voice heard. That's my challenge, that's Jeremy's challenge, and that's what we're going to be trying to do this week.
We talked a bit about the National Executive Committee. Another decision that they took was to create a second deputy leader spot reserved for a woman. I mean, are you happy about this? It sounds like your powers are about to be halved.
No, I've been calling for this since the first deputy leadership election, because gender representation is not strong enough in Parliament. And actually, and in the Labour Party, we've still got more women MPs than all the other parties put together. But Jeremy and I want 50% representation at the next election. And actually, one of the things that I found very useful as deputy leader is to have my own mandate from the membership. And I know people are worried about having 3 people around the shadow cabinet table who have their own mandate. I know some people are worried about what they see that could be a damaging one member, one vote election with all sorts of different candidates in a second deputy leadership thing, but I think it's only good for the party, and I think it's good for women's representation, and that's why I argue for it at the NEC.
Do you want the next Labour leader to be women?
I absolutely do, yeah. I mean, I don't want there to be a new Labour leader or even a leadership election anytime soon, but I think when Jeremy finally stands down as Prime Minister, he should be replaced by a woman.
Should there be an all-women shortlist then?
I think no. I think the party has got the rules, and we're changing the rules to do that. But I think that it seems to me that the time is right for Labour to choose a woman to lead us after Jeremy.
Now, we talked a bit earlier in the interview about the need for the party to unite. One of the issues that has been extremely divisive is anti-Semitism, and perhaps it's one reason why, despite the crisis in the Brexit talks, the internal arguments in the Conservative Party, Labour has effectively been stagnating in the polls. You haven't managed to pull ahead because you spent all this time introspectively looking at some of your own problems. So can you tell me how many unresolved cases are there, complaints, when it comes to anti-Semitism?
Well, first of all, let me say we have been too slow and we should have acted more quickly, and that's been acknowledged by Jeremy, John McDonnell and myself. And actually, now that we've reached the point where we've adopted the standard international definition of anti-Semitism, we've also significantly increased the number of staff that deal with these backlog of cases. I don't know the exact number because there's a sort of quasi-judicial role played, and these things can always end up in the courts. And so it's
the deputy leader. I mean, shouldn't you be looking? I mean, you've spoken out so strongly about anti-Semitism. Yeah. I find it really surprising, to be honest, that you don't know the figures.
It's hard to explain this, but I do care about it. But every individual case is a quasi-judicial case, and you can't expect the leader and deputy leader or sort of front benchers to sort of know the detail of every single case.
Do you know how many people have been expelled over anti-Semitism?
I don't, I'm afraid, but I've asked for it, and the committee that deals with this is very protective of its, because it has to be legally watertight what it does. So, but our General Secretary assures me that the backlog of cases that she inherited when she took over has now been processed. The committee that looks at it has many live cases, and I would hope that very shortly they'll be reaching results on the allegations made against some pretty disturbing characters.